Weston B. Mills, 56, a big fella at 6'1", and 250 lbs, with hair as black as the soul he was about to bump into, jumped off his combine. He was just checking what got snagged in the blades, reckoning he was all alone in the paddock that night, in Cardington, Ohio, back in '79. Before hopping down, he flicked on the lights 'cause dusk had just settled in. Then he heard this weird voice right behind him saying his name. He spun round quick smart, couldn't believe his eyes at what was standing there. Years later, he told his family all about what went down that night. Who the bloody hell said? "That?" I yelled out, thinking someone was just having a lend at me. I spun round real quick, expecting to see one of my mates. I stumbled back, landed on the combine's tire, then hit the deck. Couldn't believe what was standing there. The combine's light was shining on something hiding in the trees, about 20 feet away. Something I've only read about in books, and I wouldn't dare say what I reckon it was out loud. I don't remember pulling myself together or getting up, but as I did, it started moving like it was gonna come at me. "Shit, I'm in the furthest paddock," I muttered to myself, staring at it, trying to figure out what to do next as the adrenaline went fair dinkum bonkers through me. I was at least 2 miles from the farmhouse, and I knew if I didn't leg it, this was gonna be my last day on Earth. Between me and the farmhouse was the horse stable and a few patches of thick trees. My first thought was to bolt to the stable, 'cause there were things there I could use as weapons. I put one foot behind me, then the other, slowly backing away from it. My idea was to get to the back of the combine so I could hide in the corn as I ran towards the stable. Before turning to run, I paused for a sec, waiting to see what it was gonna do when it took a step towards me. Without even thinking, I flipped around and went straight into the corn. Lucky for me, the corn was dry and I could also see over the top of it. The weather vane on top of the stable was easy to spot against the stars as I fair dinkum sprinted along. I made that my focus, knowing if I slowed down or stacked it, it might be the last mistake I ever make. I actually surprised myself by how fast I was going, even with my work boots on. When I hit an open patch where there was no corn, it went quiet, except for the rustling of dry husks behind me. By the sounds of it, I'd say the thing was about 50 to 60 yards away. I knew from the clear patch to the stable it was another couple of 100 yards. I ran track in high school and knew to stay focused and control my breathing. When I cleared the corn, the stable couldn't have been more than 50 feet away. The horses were running around, whinnying, acting like they knew something was wrong. As I hurdled the fence, my first thought was to grab the pitchfork. I ran over to the wall it hung on, quickly pulling it off, then turning round as I backed myself into the corner. With each second that passed, the horses got more and more hysterical, and I knew it had to be close. Without warning, the horses suddenly stopped moving or making noise. It was almost like they were dead, but still standing. What kind of God would create such a thing? I whispered under my breath, clutching the pitchfork, waiting for it to show itself. Right then, something grabbed my left ankle, and before I could look down to see what it was, I was ripped through the side of the stable as I flew through the air, hitting the ground about 30 yards away. As I lay there gazing up at the night sky, the wind knocked right out of me. I couldn't believe I still had a tight grip on the pitchfork. I was shocked a man of my size could be ripped through the stable wall, then easily tossed that far. It was obvious I was bugger all compared to the thing that threw me like I was a rag doll. I then heard the corn husk rustling again, and in that split second, I raised the pitchfork up in a defensive position as it leaped on me. It snarled as it slid down on the tines, sinking into its flesh. It got mere inches from me as its horrid breath engulfed my face, its saliva trickling down onto my cheek as I turned my head. Still holding the pitchfork, I struggled as I quickly tried moving it to the side. It was extremely heavy and I didn't want it getting any closer to me. Once it was clear, I immediately sprang to my feet, about to run, when it said, "Weston, wait." I then paused, asking in disbelief, "How the hell do you know my name?" There was a brief silence before it replied, "I know you. I've been watching you for longer than you can imagine. I knew the day would come when I've had enough. But it must be someone specific to end me. Only that person can send me to whatever dark abyss awaits me next." "What are you talking about?" "What are you?" I asked. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but I'm going to anyway." I was born Gilder Race in 1405 in Andrew, France. From a young age, I knew something was wrong with me. My thoughts were always morbid, and I reveled in the suffering of others. It wasn't until I was 32 before I acted on my desires, brutally killing the first child. I didn't have the gall until then, even though it had consumed my thoughts for many years. After I'd gotten a taste, the bloodlust took over me, and an insatiable, uncontrollable hunger consumed me. I became a beast of sorts. The first child I found was almost by accident. It was late one night, midsummer, and I just left my cousin George's house after several days of eating and heavy drinking. I was still somewhat drunk from all the wine, which ended up giving me the courage to do what I did. I was stumbling along an empty cobblestone street when I saw a young girl, probably about 7, and homeless by the looks of it, digging through the rubbish of a pub, looking for her next feed. She saw me coming, got startled, and was about to do a runner when I smiled confidently, saying as I extended my hand, "Fear not, child. If it's food you want, I have plenty at my place, and shall even show you the Black Tower where I was born." She didn't hesitate long before reaching out and taking my hand as I led her back to Chateau de Reims. I won't get into the gruesome details over what happened in the following days. Something monstrous was unleashed inside me, though. Over the next several years, I got a few of my servants to help me bring children to me, to try and satisfy an uncontrollable thirst that could never be quenched. I knew one day I'd be caught, but I simply didn't care. When I was put to death by hanging, I was told I murdered 140 children, possibly more. Strangely enough, I only remember the first and the last. A month before I got caught, it had been several weeks since the last one due to a massive fear in the surrounding towns regarding children going missing without a trace. My servant, John, was scared to take any more from towns he'd already visited, so I told him to make the journey further out, which was a few days' ride. He agreed, and while I waited for his return, I almost took my own life because I couldn't stave off whatever. The beast was I created inside me. I lost my mind as I tore the house to shreds. Upon his return, I reckon I was unrecognizable. As he and the child walked inside to see me standing by the fireplace, the expressions on their faces are burned in my memory for all eternity. Jean was frightened and immediately left the house, locking the door behind him. We never saw each other again until the day we were both hanged. I remember every detail over those next few days, but it was also like living in a very lucid dream. As I became something so dark and evil, even I didn't recognize myself anymore. When the soldiers raided Chateau de Reims, it looked as if the rooms had been bathed in blood. As I entered the Black Tower and found me sitting in my chair covered in blood, none of them wanted to touch me, let alone arrest me. It wasn't until the lead soldier ordered the men to take me into custody did they finally do it. As I was escorted out, men were crossing themselves while others were chucking up from the sight I'd left on display. As I stood there at the gallows pole, the rope around my neck, I felt relieved it was all over, but had no idea what was about to happen next. I knew I was headed to hell, but not in the way I had imagined it. The last thing I remember before waking up in a forest in a distant land was the sound of my neck snapping as my body pulled the rope tight. When I opened my eyes, I knew something was wrong with me. I remembered everything, but was no longer Gilder. I was the beast you see before you now. I had no answers, only questions, and for the longest time, I stayed as far away from people as I could until one day, the bloodlust came back and took over me again. This time, I'm able to control it for longer periods, but it must be indulged or I experience pain like you couldn't possibly imagine. Over the centuries, I've come across others like myself, each one a different mob or beast, if you will. People question where myths about creatures like us begin. Now you know, genuine evil born into this world leaves behind a traceable mark, allowing it to come back once it dies in the form of something even more sinister. We've been called the unforgiven ones, and it's been said Lucifer himself won't have us. We're brought back as hideous creatures, cursed to roam the earth forever, unless we meet the one who can end it for us. I knew you were the one the moment I laid eyes on you, but you were too young at the time. I've been waiting decades for this night. Waiting, ever patiently waiting. I've seen evil in every form. Empires rise and fall, the mass genocide of entire civilizations for nothing. Whatever darkness awaits me next, I welcome its dire embrace. Make sure no one finds my body. Burn it before burying it if you must. End me now before I end you, it said, snarling as it sprang to its feet. Without thinking, I thrust the pitchfork into it as hard as I could over and over as its screams echoed through the hot summer air. It finally collapsed onto the ground, closed its eyes, and took its last breath. I stood there for quite some time, just staring at it, trying to understand what had just happened. I'd always been a bit ho-hum about these sorts of things, never given any of it much thought. I wasn't taking any chances, and did as it instructed. I grabbed a bunch of wood that was next to the stable, made a ripper fire, and burned it until there wasn't much left. I then spent the rest of the night finding and burying it in a spot deep, enough that'll hopefully never get disturbed, at least in my lifetime. I never said a word of it to anyone for obvious reasons, but felt compelled to do so before I cark it. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.